The line that cracked my world wasn't shouted. It slid under a laugh like a knife under paper. I was stepping through my son's back gate with a warm casserole balanced in both hands when I heard my daughter-in-law ask, casual as weather, why is he even still alive? I didn't drop the dish. I didn't turn around. I did what years of being a quiet man had trained me to do. Pretend I hadn't heard and walk in like the floor belonged to me. If you've ever gone through something like this, drop a comment. I'm listening. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments section. Okay, deep breath. Let me tell you everything. The backyard felt smaller than it used to. String lights, a rented speaker, a folding table that someone covered with a paper tablecloth that sagged in the middle from condensation. People were everywhere. Neighbors I didn't know by name, Brianna's friends from her office, a few of Noah's co-workers, and my granddaughter Ava at the far end, handing napkins to kids who weren't much younger than her. Smoke from the grill stretched into the evening like a thin ribbon. I could taste lighter fluid on the air. I put the casserole on the side table near the drinks. Nobody offered to take it from me. Nobody said, "Thanks, Art." The music was the kind that insists you're having fun, even when you aren't. I found a chair at the back edge of the patio behind a planter of rosemary that May used to clip for Sunday chicken. That planter was still there. So was the maple we planted when Noah turned 8, the one he'd named Captain because he liked the idea of a tree telling everyone what to do. It threw patchy shade over the yard. I used to oil the handle on that gate. I used to fix the squeak in that hinge. Funny what a man notices when he's trying not to feel. Brianna saw me and pasted on a community center smile. "Oh, Arthur, you made it!" The same voice I'd heard a minute earlier on the other side of the fence, light and crisp and perfectly shaved of empathy. She air-kissed the air next to my ear and pivoted away. Noah moved through the guests with that practiced ease you get from leading meetings where the answer is already decided. He clapped backs. He squeezed shoulders. He gave me a nod that said, "Not now, Dad. Later." There's always a later until there isn't. I looked around for a place to set my feelings and found none. A neighbor asked for a bottle opener. Someone shouted for ketchup. The Bluetooth speaker hiccuped and then blasted an anthem from a summer I'd rather not relive. I stared at the maple. Captain had a branch that dipped toward the spot where May once put a kiddie pool. May's laugh used to live in this yard. You know how a memory shows up with its own temperature? Hers arrived warm. "Quick thing before we do dessert," chimed Brianna, and the crowd turned. She took Noah's hand like a stage cue and beamed. "We have some exciting news." Noah raised his beer. "To family," he said. I lifted nothing. "We've loved this house," and my stomach dropped one slow inch at a time, "but it's time for the next chapter. We're listing it next week." A clause hit like hail, sharp, loud, a little painful. People whistled. Someone said "upgrade" as if the word were a merit badge. I watched the red plastic cups tilt. Not a single one tilted toward me. The place was mine once. I could still feel where the deck board near the back door sat proud by a quarter-inch, the spot that caught the toe of every guest who tried to carry too many plates at once. I'd sanded that board in 2003 and told May I'd redo it this fall. She'd kissed my shoulder and said, "Leave one thing imperfect. It keeps us honest." During the clapping, Ava looked over at me. 16, hair pulled into a clean ponytail, the only person who looked like she recognized my face and not just my role. She didn't smile. She gave me a little nod, the kind you learn to do when you wanted to tell someone, "I see you," without making a speech. Was I supposed to stand up and cheer for the sale of the last room that still smelled faintly like my wife's lemon oil? Was I supposed to clap while strangers counted how many bedrooms it had?
Brianna rolled right into logistics. Photos tomorrow, open house on Saturday. We'll keep things respectful. She said the word like it had quotation marks. And we'll absolutely mention how loved this home has been by one family for decades. She looked at me when she said that last line, as if the affection could be repackaged into bullet points and sold by the square foot. I kept my hands in my lap. My knuckles looked older in that light, the skin thin and honest. I thought of the gate hinge, the water heater I replaced during a cold snap, the gutter I cleared after Mallory's funeral because it rained and the rain doesn't wait for grief. Respectful, I said quietly, mostly to myself. The rosemary scratched my sleeve as if nature were trying to get my attention. Noah finally walked over, parked halfway between me and the dessert table, like he might need to pivot if I said the wrong thing. "Dad," he said, "we were going to tell you this week. The market is strong," I finished for him, because I've been alive long enough to know the script. You saved it for the announcement. It felt right with everyone here. We're still family. That word does a lot of work, I said. He strode back to the crowd before I could decide if I regretted the sentence. I watched him slide his arm around Brianna's waist. She laughed, head thrown back, white teeth, perfect photo. I could still hear her question behind the fence. Why is he even still alive? The words hung in the air, invisible, heavier than the grill smoke. I didn't leave. I sat there through the cupcakes, blue frosting mountains toppled by 6-year-olds, and the photos by the fence, and the group selfie where I was asked to hold the phone because, "Your hands are steady, Arthur." I held their moments still, like a dutiful tripod. The metal chair under me complained each time I shifted, like it wanted me to say something on its behalf, too. At some point, someone asked who brought the casserole. "I did," I said. A woman I didn't know gave me a thin smile and said, "Oh, we're doing cupcakes. It's simpler." Simpler is a nice way to say forgettable. When dusk slid in and the mosquitoes started their work, I stood. I left the casserole where it was and walked out the way I came, palm on the same gate I'd sanded back when the paint peeled like a sunburn. It still caught just a bit before it let go. I could have fixed it in 15 minutes. I decided not to. The drive to my apartment was muscle memory. Right on Pinecrest, left at the church with the broken bell. 2 lights, then the diagonal that always tempted drivers to pretend they were alone in the world. I turned the radio off and let the silence press against me until I could hear the small rattle the dashboard makes when the vent fan is high. That sound has kept me company on worse days. Inside my place, I did what a man does when a day refuses to end. I made coffee I didn't need. I set out a plate and didn't eat. I stared at the magnet on my fridge that says, "Pay what you owe," and tried not to turn it into a sermon. May had bought it as a joke. It never stayed a joke for long. I pressed the voicemail button because the red light was blinking. Noah again. "Hey, Dad. Sorry about the timing. We love you. We'll talk this week." He said it like the sentence had been drafted by a committee and approved by HR. He didn't say my name. I opened the hall closet and pulled down a box that holds my important papers. Not because I had a plan, just because touching something with edges steadied me. Birth certificates, the title to a car I no longer drive, an old will that looked too much like a trust exercise I'd passed without reading. I put the box on the table and closed it again. Not yet, I told myself. Tonight isn't for signatures. I pulled a pad from the drawer. Lines help. I wrote one word at the top. Keys. Beneath it, accounts. Then, house. Then I drew a square around house and a second square around the first, as if I could keep a thing from collapsing by drawing a fence no one else could see. I looked at my handwriting, still neat, thank God, and felt my breath settle into a count I learned years ago when anxious customers would try to turn math into panic. In, 4. Hold, 4. Out, 4. Again. What do you do when your child turns your life into marketing copy? You write your own draft. You decide what gets published. I washed the empty coffee cup and set it back in the cabinet, mouth up. May believed bowls should face the future. She said it without irony. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway until the hum of the refrigerator sounded like proof the basics were still being handled. Then I went to my chair by the window and watched the city pretend it wasn't tired. I didn't leave the party when I heard the sentence. I left after the applause. There's a difference. One is running. The other is choosing your exit.
I woke up before sunrise with the taste of lighter fluid still in my mouth and a sentence ringing like a bad doorbell. Instead of arguing with a fence that would never apologize, I put on a shirt with buttons. Dignity has muscle memory, if you let it. Nora Briggs' office sat on the second floor of a brick building that used to be a tailor's. The elevator had the good kind of rattle, honest, not ominous. Her receptionist offered tea in a paper cup painted to resemble china. I held it and watched the second hand crawl as if time could be negotiated with a stern look. Nora stepped out right on the half hour. Trim navy dress, flats that could cross a courthouse and a rainy sidewalk without changing. Art, she said, shaking my hand the way competent people do. No squeeze theatrics, just presence. Bring what's heavy. I set my box on her desk and opened it. My old will, a durable power of attorney I'd signed after a knee surgery. A stack of beneficiary forms full of promises I hadn't reread since Mallory was alive. And a list I'd started last night. Keys, accounts, house. Boxed twice, like a prayer you whisper with your hands. She read the power of attorney first. Immediate and durable, she said, tapping the corner. Your son can act now, not just if you're incapacitated. I felt the room tilt a degree to the left. He shouldn't, I said, though I knew should is a weak verb in a world run by forms. No, Nora agreed. But banks don't grade ethics, they grade paperwork. She slid a new document from her printer like a magician who prefers receipts to applause. Revocation. We'll notarize today. You'll hand-deliver certified copies to every institution, then we'll split financial authority from medical. Different agents, clear lanes. She looked up. Do you want Noah on either? No. The answer surprised me by arriving as a full sentence. Not on anything that lets me sign for me. Good, she said. You're allowed to be clear. She circled house on my list. We'll also clean up your will, executor moved to a professional, and shift beneficiaries into a living trust, so no one plays tug-of-war in probate. She slid a brochure across. Sequoia Trust Partners. Boring in the best way. They do what paper says. We read line by line. I initialed where the language put my spine back where it belonged. In one clause, we turned son into education fund for Ava with stewardship conditions. I didn't remove love, I aimed it. Healthcare proxy, Nora said, gentler now. Separate document. Name someone who will follow directions, not someone who expects to set them. I want the non-family advocate, someone who will treat instructions like a map. I'll refer you to a patient advocacy professional we trust, she said, typing. You approve after a conversation. Then came the notary stamp. Its thump felt like a door catching properly on its hinge. We made a checklist. Riverstone Credit Union, Summit Ridge Brokerage, Pinecrest Insurance, my pharmacy, Social Security, and the utility companies that still had Noah listed as authorized. She printed a slim binder with sleeves and handed me a sheet of labels she'd already filled. Revocations, confirmations, beneficiaries, health, notes. On the spine, she wrote in a small, steady hand, control.
Banks will try to be helpful in the wrong direction, she said. Ask for a manager. Use the word update and the phrase written confirmation by mail. Paper is power where apologies fail. I stepped back into daylight, feeling like someone had returned a tool I didn't realize I'd lent out. At Riverstone Credit Union, a manager named Cara Ruiz opened her door before the teller could decide where to send me. She glanced at my binder and smiled. "Let's get you squared away, Mr. Hale." I slid the revocation across, plus my license and Nora's one-page script for bankers in a hurry. Please update profiles to show revocation effective today. Note that any attempt to use a prior POA is to be denied and flagged. Remove outside view access, cancel any secondary cards, change security questions, written confirmation by mail. She typed as I spoke, reading each keystroke aloud like a pilot calling a checklist. I see one authorized user, Noah Hale, limited transfers, secondary debit. Remove? She looked up, even though she knew the answer. Remove. Reissue my card. New number, new PIN. Done. She printed a profile update and, unprompted, added a protective alert that told back-office staff to call me directly on any irregular attempt. Not implying fraud, but you deserve to be the first phone call about your money. A memory hit like a soft punch. A winter plumbing bill last year that I'd covered cash, and later saw an odd debit in my statement I'd written off as my own mistake. I breathed once through my nose and let it go. This was not a museum of grudges. This was a workbench.
Kara slid a letter across for signature. We acknowledge revocation received and recorded as of today's date. She gave me a temporary card and promised a mailed confirmation. And, she said, glancing at her screen, switching you back to paper statements. Mayo has a way of keeping people honest. May used to say, the mailbox tells the truth slower, but cleaner, I said. Kara smiled like she'd known a woman like that once. Summit Ridge Brokerage sat in a glassy building that smelled faintly of copier heat. A representative named Janelle Park met me with a handshake that said, "We can do this without drama." I led with the revocation and followed with Kara's confirmation letter like a man laying down good cards. Access shows one third-party contact, Noah Hale, view only, she said, and e-delivery forwarding to an alternate email. She lifted an eyebrow. Remove all of it, I said. Disable e-delivery, paper only. Add a phone pin for verbal requests, and I want a letter on letterhead listing what was removed and what's enforced going forward. We'll also lock beneficiary changes behind in-person verification, she said, typing a note that looked like a boundary becoming policy. It isn't required, but it's smart. We reviewed beneficiaries. Where the old form treated my last name like a shortcut for destiny, the new one turned legacy into instructions. A modest trust for Ava. Distributions tied to school or work or service. A percentage to Harbor Haven Shelter under a line that read, "Dignity in Housing," because it calmed me to put those words next to a number. No revenge in it, just aim. On my way out, Janelle turned her monitor slightly. 3 months ago, someone called to add that view access. Caller ID matched your number. Protocol was weaker then. I pictured my phone charging on the kitchen counter while Noah looked for a charger of his own and helped by checking the time on mine. How many families reroute trust by convenience? It's corrected. That's enough for today. Agreed, she said, printing the letter while the ink still smelled warm. At Pinecrest Insurance, a man in a tie with trout on it walked me room by room through the last places my name could be used for someone else's idea of helpful. We crossed out authorized person to receive information where it didn't belong. We rewrote beneficiaries to match the trust Nora was drafting. We declined courtesy access that helped no one but chaos.
Every signature put a plank back in the floor. By late afternoon, the binder had weight. Revocation copies in front sleeves, bank letter behind them, brokerage confirmation, updated beneficiary designations, sticky notes with dates and the names of people who had done their jobs. It felt like I'd been carrying a house on my shoulders and finally remembered where the joists belonged. I stopped at my doctor's office not to confess sorrow, but to document clarity. Dr. Leela Ahmed listened the way people listen when they understand that paying attention is a clinical skill. You want a capacity note for your chart? A snapshot, not a prophecy. Exactly. She printed a letter on letterhead. As of today's date, Mr. Arthur Hale demonstrates decisional capacity and understanding of his medical and legal affairs. She signed it with a pen that didn't skip. I slid a copy into the Health tab and gave another to Nora's receptionist on my way back to the car. On the drive home, the city looked exactly the same and completely different. Storefronts I'd passed for years, sitting under a sky that hadn't been told to be kinder, but somehow was. Was this what agency felt like? Ordinary and extraordinary at once? How do you stop being a prop in your own life? You pick up a pen. In my kitchen, I labeled a second binder, Copies, Home. I made a list on the inside cover of who still needed paper: utilities, pharmacy, Social Security, my renter's policy, the DMV. I stacked addressed envelopes and left them unsealed, waiting for the driver's license copy the printer would spit out with its reliable old man wheeze. I wrote, in block letters I could read without glasses, mail certified, call for confirmation letter, file. I boiled water and set May's copper kettle back on the stove the way I used to after dinner, then caught myself and smiled. You don't polish loss, you give it a folder. When the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear Noah's voice to know what words it would choose. Love isn't a password, it's a practice. Tonight my practice looked like stamps and signatures. I slid the binder on the chair by the door where I'd see it in the morning, a small, dark animal that meant business. For the first time since the backyard, my pulse matched the second hand of the clock above the sink. No rush, no drag, just time behaving.
The morning after I labeled every sleeve in the control binder, I went where people go when they want the truth, without commentary, the library. You can call it old-fashioned. I call it the last building in town where facts outnumber opinions. The clerk showed me how to wake the microfilm machine like a lawnmower that had survived 3 owners. I fed it parcel numbers and names and watched the screen bloom with public record. Noah showed up more than once. Not just the house on Cedar Lane, their house, not mine anymore, but a duplex on a tired block of Briar Avenue, held under a small LLC that sounded like a good idea written on a napkin. Taxes late, and notice a default last year that was cured at the last minute. Equipment leases for his contracting outfit, Blue Ladder renovations, skating 3 payments behind more than once. Nothing catastrophic, enough to suggest a habit, the kind of habit you get away with when people clap for your timing. I copied what mattered and slid the warm pages into a manila envelope I labeled in block letters, Briar Ave. When the printer paused, I saw myself reflected in the glass, an older man with a jaw set not in anger, but in arithmetic. How do you help a son who treats paper like weather? You become the forecast. I drove to Briar Avenue on a weekday afternoon when the city was yawning. The duplex listed hard to one side, paint thin, grass tired. A for rent sign leaned against the porch as if it had lost interest in standing. A tenant in a ball cap loaded boxes into a sedan that still carried the ghost of a dealership sticker. "You moving out?" I heard myself ask. He looked at me like a man measuring risk. "Promised repairs never happened," he said. "Floor in the bathroom soft, stair treads worse." "Document it," I said, not unkindly. "Photos, dates, keep copies." "Does that help?" he asked, like a man who wanted to believe the world could be persuaded by anything but noise. "It helps the right people help you," I said. There's a tenants clinic at Lakeside Community Center on Thursdays. Ask for a repair and deduct packet. Bring pictures. Bring the lease." He studied my face as if he recognized something he couldn't name, then nodded once. Not gratitude. Alignment. On the front door, an orange sticker flapped under old tape, an inspection notice from weeks back that wanted answers. Paper doesn't get tired. It waits. I stood on the stoop and thought about the calendar. The county's tax lien sale was posted on their website. I knew how those worked. You front the unpaid tax, the owner redeems with interest. If they don't, time moves you toward a foreclosure that decent people hope never happens. Was it petty or precise to buy time the same way other men buy tools? The auction room at the county building had the smell of long afternoons and rules that don't bend. They handed me a bidder's number written in marker on a sticker, 47. I stuck it on my jacket like a man who had finally decided to stop pretending he didn't care about the score. When the parcel number for the Briar Avenue duplex came up, 3 hands rose. 2 of them went down after the rate ticked once. Mine stayed. The gavel made a small sound like a pencil deciding to stop. The certificate was thin, just paper with a parcel number and a percentage that would embarrass a savings account, but it had weight. I slid it into a clear sleeve in the binder and wrote in tidy script under a new tab, County, Code, Calendar. I did not think of revenge. I thought of gravity. A day later, code enforcement followed the orange sticker with actual steps. An inspector in a windbreaker knocked on Briar Avenue and made his notes with a pencil that had seen it all before. Replace tread, repair subfloor. Moisture under the sink suggests a long story. Meanwhile, I called the utility that served the property and asked to be added to courtesy notices as lien holder. The woman on the line said, "Most folks don't know they can do that." I said, "Most folks haven't been alive long enough to learn to ask." When Redwood Realty, Jamie Lake, called about the Cedar Lane listing, she had a voice like a commercial break. "Mr. Hale, we'd love a quote from you for the listing sheet. Buyers eat up original owner history. 2 sentences about raising your son here." "No," I said politely. "Please remove my name and any reference to me from all marketing. Direct future requests to my attorney."
A beat of silence, then professional frost. "We're just trying to honor the story." "It's my story," I said. "It does not require your honor." I texted Nora a heads up. She replied with 3 words I wish I'd learned earlier. "I'll paper them." And then the second lever arrived. Not a scheme, not a trick, just process. Henry Cole, an old acquaintance, no relation to Brianna, ran a small law practice in a storefront office that looked like it could fix a hinge and file a motion with equal confidence. He poured me coffee that tasted like decisions and listened while I laid out what I had. The tax lien, the inspection notice, the pattern of near misses on debts that preferred not to be collected. "I'm not interested in embarrassing him," I said. "I want a schedule he can't charm." "Assignment is possible," Henry said, leafing through a contract sample. "One lease in particular, equipment for Blue Ladder renovations, allows assignment to a third-party servicer. You could have an entity buy the debt at a discount and put it under a boring plan. No late fee carnival, no threats, just due dates." "Clean and transparent," I said. "No fireworks." He nodded. "Silverline Servicing handles small commercial paper like this. We can keep your name out of the front window. The notices will come from them." "How discreet?" "Discreet enough that what matters is the calendar, not the signature." 2 weeks later, a letter went out on Silverline letterhead that could have been designed by a librarian. Assignment notice, payment schedule, contact numbers. A second letter, private, sat in my binder. Purchase agreement executed by an LLC that lived only to send boring mail on Mondays. I asked Henry to make sure the terms felt like a handrail, not a trap. We chose the dull knife, sharp enough to cut, slow enough to make sure you walked out on your own feet. Noah's number lit my phone that afternoon. I let it ring twice and answered in the voice I used at Riverstone when I wanted to be taken seriously without being loud. "Dad," he said, without hello, "some company says they own my lease now. They moved the due date. What is this?" "Assignment," I said. "It's in your contract." "So you—" "I arranged for a servicer to handle a debt you signed. You will have a schedule. Follow it. This is your—" He searched for a word that wouldn't make him sound like a teenager. "Why are you doing this?" "Because interest is a teacher. Because calendars don't lie. Because shouting doesn't fix floors." "You could have helped me," he said, quieter now, as if the room had shrunk and he needed the conversation to fit. "I am," I said, "by refusing to let you use my name as insulation." He hung up without goodbye. I wrote the time in the margin under Silverline, first notice, and added, "Did not escalate." A man learns to keep minutes when he realizes memory goes soft in the corners. The title company for Briar Avenue called next, looking to expedite redemption. I told them the amount was whatever the county published, no more, no less, and that letters could do all the smiling for us. "We may need a letter from you," the agent tried. "You may need to read the statute," I answered. Polite, precise. Meanwhile, I drove by Cedar Lane and saw the white post planted in the lawn like a verdict. "For sale" swung from two brass hooks, red against green. The arm of the sign pointed at the porch where May and I used to sit with her lemon oil cloth and a glass of water she insisted was for the plants. I did not stop the car. Stopping can be a permission slip for paying you're not ready to grade. I mailed the certified copies of the revocation to Pinecrest and Summit Ridge and Riverstone and tucked the green return receipts into the front sleeve labeled Confirmations. I added 3 new sticky notes into the inside cover. Title Co., no favors. Code reinspection, monitor. Servicer, no calls from me. Discipline isn't glamorous. It's a repetition you do on purpose. At night, when the building groaned like old wood learning new weather, I took the control binder down and read the tabs like a man reading a map. Keys, accounts, house, county, code, calendar. Each one calmed the room by half a degree. If you're wondering whether what I did was cruel, ask yourself what you call a father who teaches his son how to live inside a schedule instead of a show. What was I supposed to do? Write another check so he could keep pretending paper was optional? I slept better than I had in weeks, not triumphant, not vindicated, just aligned. The month would turn soon. Calendars do that without asking how we feel. Silverline would send its first payment received slip, or it wouldn't. The county would count days toward redemption. The duplex would get a new tread or a fine. I would keep my voice low and my postage high. I hadn't raised a fist. I hadn't slammed a door. I'd raised a ledger and let the dates do the talking. The first payment received slip from Silverline arrived on a Tuesday, thin as a leaf and twice as calming. I tucked it behind the tab marked Calendar and set the binder back down like a brick that knew its job. I didn't call Noah. I didn't text a screenshot. Silence, I was learning, could be a boundary instead of a weapon. That afternoon, I drove to Harbor Haven Shelter because quiet also needs a purpose. The building used to be a small school, and you could still see the ghosts of chalk lines under the new paint. Carmen Ortiz met me in the doorway with a clipboard and the kind of hug that stops 2 inches from contact and waits for permission. "You're our new money class guy?" she asked, smiling with her eyes. "I'm the guy with a whiteboard and a boring sense of humor," I said. "Perfect," she said. "Boring is a luxury most of our folks haven't been offered." In the old library, now a multi-purpose room, Carmen had set a second-hand whiteboard, a card of markers with 2 that worked, and a plastic bin filled with donated calculators that looked like they had seen some things. I laid out what I'd brought: a stack of blank envelopes, a jar of pens that didn't skip, and a handout I'd typed and printed at the library called Your First Calm Budget, and a sign-in sheet with a column for name you prefer to be called. Not legal names, names people wanted to hear out loud. 5 women and 1 man drifted in with the day still clinging to their jackets. A nurse aide between shifts, a woman with a bandage on her wrist and a face that said she'd chosen herself for the first time in a while. A young dad whose eyes kept flicking to the door, as if time could change its mind. I wrote on the board in big letters, "Money doesn't have morals." Then underneath, "But calendars do." "I'm Art," I said, topping the marker against my palm. "I'm not here to tell you what you deserve. I'm here to help you make paper behave." We started with envelopes, not apps, not lectures. Real paper you could hold, labeled with nouns that paid bills. Rent, food, transit, phone. I told them about the first time May and I used envelopes when Noah was a baby and diapers cost more than my pride. We paid in cash at the supermarket because seeing the bills leave was the only way to believe we were really spending. The nurse aide nodded, the small kind of nod that says someone just handed you a tool instead of a speech. We wrote due dates on the whiteboard like a prayer calendar. We added late beside the ones that always showed up like they were ashamed to be on time. In the corner, I drew a box and wrote receipts, then taped a manila envelope to the wall beneath it. "Put what proves your work in here," I said, "even if you think no one will ask, especially then." During a break, Carmen introduced me to a teenager refilling the coffee urn. "This is Ava," she said, eyes twinkling because she already knew. My granddaughter looked taller in fluorescent light, more sure in her shoulders than she had in that backyard. "You told me about this place," she said, "and there was no accusation in it, only curiosity. Mom signed my community service sheet. I need hours for school. Can I help?" "Grab a marker that writes," I said. "You're promoted to highlighter queen." She grinned and pulled a neon highlighter from the jar like a sword from a story. During the second half of class, Ava sat near the door, drawing stars next to due dates in people's notebooks, whispering things like, "That's a good plan," and "I like how you did this." You don't realize how heavy paper is until someone small helps you carry it. When the hour ended, Carmen handed out bus passes and a stack of small notebooks that used to be kept for donors, then forgot they were useful for everyone. The young dad waited until the room thinned and asked me, "What if you're already late, like really late?" I said, "Then you talk to the calendar instead of the fear. You make phone calls with a pen in your hand. You repeat what they say, and you say, 'Please send that in writing.' You put that paper in your envelope." I pointed to the taped receipts envelope on the wall, "and you bring it back next week." Walking out, Ava fell into step beside me. "Grandma would have loved this." She would have reorganized the markers by color and confidence," I said. Ava laughed, a small brightness I wanted to put in my pocket. "Do you want to come Thursday nights?" I asked. "If you're here and if it's okay." I said, "It's more than okay." I kept my voice steady, because joy can be skittish around teenagers. On the drive home, Ava folded the spare sign-in sheet into a paper airplane and then carefully unfolded it again, smoothing the creases with her thumb. "Do you think Mom and Dad are mad at you?" she asked, staring at the dashboard. "I think they're used to me being quiet. Now I'm being quiet on purpose." At my apartment, the control binder waited on the chair. I flipped to County, Code, Calendar, and penciled in the reinspection date for Briar Avenue. Then, beneath it, I wrote in smaller letters, "Thursday, budget class, 6 p.m. I didn't need to write it. I wrote it anyway. Some appointments deserve ink. Days took on a rhythm. Banks in the morning, phone calls on lunch breaks, Harbor Haven at dusk. Carmen started calling me Professor, which made me feel taller than my actual height. We added a jar labeled Emergency Wins, where people could drop notes, paid off a fine, got a payment plan, set up a new account with my name only. We read them aloud, like a benediction.
One woman returned with a folder of documents in a grocery bag, embarrassed by the bag, and apologizing for the folder like it had let her down. We sat together and made piles on a cleaned cafeteria table. Today, this week, later. We hole-punched the Today stack and slid it into a binder with tabs Ava labeled in block letters. The woman cried, the quiet kind of tears that don't want the room to notice. Ava slid a tissue over like she was completing a transfer. At home, the mail carried Redwood Realty flyers to my building the way pollen carries a season. Open house, storybook charm. One had a photo of the maple in the front yard, Captain, cropped so you couldn't see the deck May and I built. I didn't tear them up. I slid them into a sheet protector behind the tab labeled House and wrote in the margin, Memory not equal marketing. When Jamie called again, I let it ring out. Nora forwarded me an email she'd sent. Please refrain from referencing Mr. Hale in any advertising. Any violation will be addressed. Paper has a tone when Nora writes it. It sounds like a door that closes without a slam. Noah texted twice in 2 weeks. One, we need to talk, and one photo of Ava at a school concert with a note that said she crushed it. I replied to the second with a blue heart. The first I left unlit. Is restraint a kindness or a punishment? Maybe it's both until the person chooses differently. On a Thursday, Ava beat me to the shelter. She'd raided our supply of envelopes and drawn tiny badges on them. Rent Ranger, Food Crew, Phone Patrol. When people opened their packets and smiled in spite of themselves, I caught Carmen's eye. She nodded toward Ava like a blessing. She's got May's volunteer gene, she whispered, and your spine. We invited a guest from a credit union, Kiara. Hair up, sleeves rolled, she showed folks how to set up alert-only notifications that didn't allow anyone to move money, just watch it. She said, you are allowed to know without being controlled, and a quiet in the room changed temperature. After, she handed me a small stack of brochures and a handwritten note. Let me know if any of your students get stonewalled. We'll walk them through. I started keeping a second clipboard labeled Questions I Can't Answer. I'd write down the ones that needed a lawyer or a social worker or a housing counselor and pass them to Carmen, and she would move like a person who already believed the answer existed. We were not rescuing. We were building a staircase and letting people climb at their own pace. One night, as we erased the board, Ava asked, "Do you miss the house?" I said, "Every day, but missing is not the same as needing." She capped the marker and tucked it into the jar. "Mom says you're being difficult." I said, "I'm trying to be clear. Difficult is what people call clarity when it costs them something." She didn't argue. She picked up the stack of envelopes and began counting them into neat piles of 10. I watched her hands, steady and patient, and thought of the maple's roots, unseen, working, not asking for applause. When we left, the night air carried the metallic smell of rain that might or might not happen. We stood under the awning and listened to the city consider itself. "Grandpa," Ava said, key fob in her palm, "thanks for letting me help." I said, "Thank you for helping. It's different." On my kitchen table, the binder sat closed, and for once, I didn't open it. I put my palm on the cover, like a man taking an oath to nobody but himself. What do you call a life that chooses order over noise, service over theater, boundaries over speeches? I don't know the word, but it feels like the opposite of being erased.
The week the open house rider flipped to sale pending, the sign looked less like a verdict and more like punctuation. I drove past on my way to the hardware store and didn't slow down. Boundaries sometimes mean you keep the car moving. Redwood Realty tried one more time.
Jamie left a voicemail with a smile in it. "Mr. Hale, we're doing a sweet little video about the soul of the home. Just a few sentences from you about raising your son here. People love that." People love that. I saved the message, then forwarded it to Nora. 15 minutes later, she replied with a copy of an email that began, "as previously stated," and ended with "cease." Paper, when it tells the truth, doesn't need a camera. 2 days after, Nora called me herself. "Offer accepted," she said. "Closing in 30 days if the appraisal behaves. Buyers are Frank and Eileen Porter. Retired, pre-approved, not dramatic." Not dramatic, I repeated, tasting the phrase like a good broth. That's my favorite new adjective. "The title company will ask you for a seller's statement because your name's on old records," she added. "I've already provided the update. You won't be asked to speak at their open house or their dinner table." "Thank you." The night before the inspection, I took out a sheet of stationery I hadn't used since Mallory sent thank you notes with lemon oil on her fingers. I wrote slow, printing more than I usually do, because I wanted a stranger to hear the words without needing a translator. "Dear new people at Cedar Lane, this is a care note, not a story. The main water shutoff is behind the panel on the north wall of the basement. The panel sticks. Tap the corner with a knuckle and it will behave. The gas cap on the grill line out back rattles. It isn't loose. The furnace prefers a filter changed on the first day of the month, even if it isn't strictly due. The deck board near the steps sits proud by a 1/4 inch. I sanded it in 2003 and promised to level it this fall. I never did. Leave one thing imperfect. It keeps you honest. The maple out front has been called Captain since my boy was 8. If you mulch, keep it off the trunk. Deep water in early June makes July kinder. The gate on the south fence will always squeak a little, even if you oil it. I started to like that. It sounded like a house clearing its throat before it said hello. You don't owe this place devotion. It isn't a shrine. But if you listen, it will tell you how to take care of it. A. Hale, former caretaker. I sealed it, wrote for the Porters, deliver at closing, and walked it to Nora's office the next morning. "No marketing," I said, handing her the envelope. "No video, no social, just the people who turn the key." "Understood," she said, tucking it into a red folder the way you'd tuck a napkin around something fragile. Appraisal came back clean, a number that would feed a real estate email for a day and be forgotten the next. When sale pending turned to sold, I was at Harbor Haven helping Carmen stack a new shipment of coats that a church had donated without making a speech about it. The sign had changed while I was busy counting zippers. Isn't that what healing looks like? Paperwork turning over when you're not staring at it? A week later, Nora rang. "They'd like to send you something." "I don't need something," I said. "It's a letter," she said softly. "From Eileen." I picked it up the next day. The envelope was the thick kind you save if you grew up in a house that reuses ribbon. Inside, a single page in careful cursive. "Mr. Hale, we received your care note at closing. Frank and I walked the house with it in our hands and did everything in order, including tapping the panel. We spoke to the maple like we were introducing ourselves to a neighbor. Thank you for leaving instructions, not demands. We promised to listen. Eileen and Frank." I read it once at my kitchen table, and then again, with my palm flat beside it, the way you steady a map so it doesn't curl. I did not cry. I did something stranger for a man like me. I laughed. Quiet. Surprised. Like a gate deciding it wasn't trapped.
That same week, a thick county envelope arrived with the tone of a bill and the contents of a benediction. Redemption on the Briar Avenue tax lien. Principal plus interest calculated by a clock that never loses patience. I stood at the counter of Riverstone Credit Union with Kara, slid the check across, and said, "Split deposit, please. Principal to my savings, interest to checking." She glanced up. "House business." "Life business," I said. From Riverstone, I drove directly to Harbor Haven. Carmen was in the kitchen unpacking a donation of mismatched mugs and laughing at the ones with cats for handles. I put a check on the stainless table and pushed it toward her. "No plaque," I said. "No names. This is for heat when the bills arrive like a dare, and for kid shoes when the seasons change faster than a growing foot." Carmen kept her hands on the edge of the table, like she was steadying herself instead of the room. "We can earmark utility assistance and children's clothing," she said. "I'll code it so it never gets reallocated to anything glamorous." "Good," I said. "Glamour is the enemy of warmth." She wrote a receipt in neat block print and slid it back. "What do you want me to call the line item in our ledger?" "Call it warmth and shoes," I said. "Nothing that needs explaining." Ava, who had arrived early and was filling the emergency winds jar with blank slips for the next class, came over and read the words upside down. "Warmth and shoes," she repeated. "Grandma would like that." "She would have bought 10 pairs on sale and hidden them in the hall closet," I said. We celebrated with paper cups of coffee that tasted like duty and one cinnamon roll someone had brought and sliced into 6 equal pieces like we were a geometry problem. The room smelled like sugar and solvent, clean floors, and something earned. What was the right feeling? Not triumph, not revenge. Relief, maybe, braided with the sense that the world can be arranged imperfectly, quietly, toward decency. When I got home, I opened the binder to the House tab. I slid in Eileen's letter behind the flyers and wrote in a margin, "Story kept where it belongs." Then I took a small envelope from the drawer and labeled it Cedar Lane, Notes for Me. Inside, I put a scrap of paper with 3 lines. May's lemon oil on the banister. Ava's hand on the fence post, first day of kindergarten. Captain's shadow at 5 p.m. summer. I sealed it and didn't put it anywhere official. Not everything needs to be filed to be true. A day later, I received a bouquet at my apartment with a note that had exactly 5 words. "We'll take care of Captain." No signature. I recognized the stationery and smiled. I set the flowers on the table without hunting for a vase. I cut the stems and tucked them into May's old pitcher. The pitcher looked like it had finally been given back the job it wanted. Noah texted a photo of the porter's moving truck and wrote, "It's done." I typed and erased 3 responses. I settled on "good," wishing them a gentle first night. He didn't reply. That was fine. I wasn't writing for him. I was writing for the part of me that still believed a closed door could be a kind thing. That night, I walked past my building's small courtyard. A scrappy sapling leaned toward the light, like hope with dirty shoes. I tipped the watering can and gave it more than it needed. "Deep water in June," I murmured, and a neighbor I barely knew looked up from his phone and nodded like I'd said something useful. Is this how you keep a story without turning it into a monument? By leaving a care note? By refusing to be a cameo in someone else's marketing? By sending interest money to heat and shoes instead of to a speech? Maybe. Or maybe you just learn to aim tenderness and let it do its quiet work. I turned out my lights early. The apartment clicked and settled around me. Somewhere in the city, a sold sign came down, and someone called a utility to put the bill in their own name. Somewhere else, a kid tried on sneakers that fit.
The second payment received slip from Silverline came on schedule. Then a third that arrived so exactly on the date you could have set a watch by it. I marked each in the calendar tab and said nothing to anyone, the way you nod to a person who finally learned which door is theirs. At Harbor Haven, the boiler coughed one morning and refused to be charmed by Carmen's gentle swearing. The repair estimate was ugly. I was still running numbers on a legal pad when a pickup rolled into the lot, and a man in a work jacket hopped out with a toolbox I recognized from 100 weekends of I've Got It, Dad. Noah. He didn't see me at first. He followed Carmen downstairs, listening like a student who'd come late to class and didn't want to be noticed. He peeled back a panel, shut off valves, moved the flashlight with steady hands. He didn't narrate what he was doing. He just did it. When he finally looked up, he caught me in the corner, binder tucked under my arm like a habit I trusted. "I heard you needed heat," he said. Not performing, not smirking, just saying the sentence like a man who had read a sign and decided to follow it. "We do," Carmen answered before I could. "We also need to not get swindled." "No upsell," he said. "No gloss." He pointed to a corroded coupling and a gasket that should have been retired 2 winters ago. "I can fix this. It'll buy you time." Carmen looked at me. I looked at the gasket and then at my son's hands. "Do it," I said. "We'll pay an invoice at market rate." He shook his head. "This one's on me." He must have seen my jaw set because he added, softer, "Consider it tuition." He worked 2 hours without theatrics. He bled air from the line, replaced what needed replacing, and only once did he swear under his breath when a stubborn nut argued with the wrench. When the boiler finally came back like a grumpy old dog that decided it would stand after all, the radiators answered, room by room, with ticking that sounded like applause from people who didn't clap. Upstairs, Ava was labeling new notebooks with block letters. She looked from me to Noah and then set her pen down. "You want coffee?" she asked, already pouring. We ended up at a diner 3 blocks away that still believes in pie on a weekday. We sat in a cracked red booth and let the waitress call us Hun without irony. No scripts, no speeches, 2 men who share a last name and a history that isn't tidy. "I've been making the payments," Noah said, eyes on the sugar packets he was arranging into a fence. "On time, in full." "I know. I also know how calendars can save men who think charisma will." He nodded once, the kind of nod a student gives when he's ready to stop arguing with the lesson. "The first night after the sale closed, Brianna cried because she realized the house would belong to strangers, and she wanted to call you for a quote." He laughed once, without joy. "I told her you weren't a quote." I let that sit. Diners are built for silence. The coffee refills take care of the conversation while you decide which parts of yourself you can afford to show. "I heard what she said in the backyard," I told him, finally. "I didn't dress it up. About me being alive." His face changed shape. Surprise, then something like shame, then something I couldn't name that looked like a man trying to swallow a pill that wasn't made for swallowing. "She was angry," he said, "at me, at money, at how grief never paid a bill. It wasn't about wanting you gone." Maybe not, but it was spoken like a truth she'd considered. He looked at the sugar fence and took it down 1 packet at a time. I've been cruel without meaning to be. I've also been cruel on purpose because it felt efficient." "I taught you some of that," I admitted. "I taught you that a finished thing is better than a truthful thing. I was quieter than I should have been for too long. After your mother died, I mistook silence for strength." We sat with that. The diner slid a slice of pie between us like a truce neither of us had ordered. "2 forks," she said, and walked away. "I'm not giving the power back," I said, meaning the papers, the POA, the beneficiaries, the slick ways families try to talk each other into convenience. It isn't punitive, it's math. The binder doesn't know how to forgive, it only knows how to keep us from lying to ourselves. "I don't want the power," he said, surprising me. I want to not be the guy people clap for because I arranged the words. I want to be the guy who shows up with a wrench and leaves with a receipt." "Then be that," I said. "It's mostly boring. It's also relief." He reached into his jacket and slid a small envelope across the table. The outside was printed with Silverline's logo. Inside, a receipt that said payment applied and a balance that was smaller than it had to be. I paid extra, not because I'm a hero, because I'm tired of accounts living in my head rent-free.
"You can be tired and decent," I said. "Those two get along."
We ate the pie in a companionable way that felt like a language I'd always known and somehow forgotten. He told me he fixed the cracked tile in their rental's bathroom himself, without Instagram and the grout lines. I told him the porter sent a note promising to take care of Captain, and he smiled for real, the face he used to make as a kid when he managed to build a tower that didn't fall and wanted someone to see it without praising it to death. "Brianna doesn't understand what you're doing," he said. "She says you're punishing us with paperwork." "I'm practicing mercy with rules," I said. "Mercy without rules turns into theater. Rules without mercy turn into war. I'm not interested in either." He slid the receipt back into the envelope, careful with the edges. "Ava says you let her make badges for envelopes." "She promoted herself," I said. "Smart managers recognize talent." He laughed into his coffee and then looked me straight. "Can I come by on Thursdays? Not every week, just to help when something's broken. No logos, no flyers, just work." "Ask Carmen," I said, "and bring your own wrench." He saluted with the fork, a joke he learned at 12 and hadn't unlearned. We paid separately without making it a scene. At the door, he hesitated. "Dad?" He rarely says the word. "Thank you for not making a speech." "I wrote a care note," I said. "Turns out that's different." He left. I stood in the parking lot and let the afternoon sky make its big, ordinary blue the way it does when you've decided not to perform grief for people who want a show. On my way back to Harbor Haven, I stopped at a nursery and bought a young maple in a pot a man my age can lift without asking for help. "This one's hardy," the clerk said. "Doesn't need to be babied." We planted it in the shelter's small yard that weekend, with volunteers who showed up wearing old sneakers and good intentions. Ava made a cardboard sign on a paint stick, "Captain's cousin." I wanted to correct the capitalization and didn't. People need to see their own handwriting in the world. At home, I opened the binder and added a new tab I'd made from a file folder I cut down to size. I wrote one word on it with a pen I used to sign the revocation: mercy. Behind it, I slid 3 things: a photocopy of the Silver Line receipt with extra circled, a photo Carmen snapped of Noah kneeling by the boiler with his wrench and no audience, and a blank sheet of paper. Space for what might come next. That isn't dramatic, but is good. Was I supposed to forget? No. Was I supposed to hound? No. I was supposed to keep my own ledger, one that balanced money and behavior and left room for a granddaughter's stars in the margins. In the quiet of my apartment, I could hear the radiator tick, heat doing its job invisibly. Isn't that the point? To keep choosing lists and mercy and trees that outlive us? To retire to performance and live as if maintenance were an art? I washed the coffee cup. I turned off the kitchen light. The room held steady. I don't know if this is how healing is supposed to look. What I do know is that my pulse isn't racing when the mail arrives anymore, and the binder no longer feels like armor so much as a map I can fold and tuck into a pocket. There are days the quiet scares me because it leaves room for memory. And on those days, I make myself do small, ordinary tasks, sharpen a pencil, oil a hinge, show up on time, so that the past has to share the table with the present. The house on Cedar Lane lives with new people now, and the maple throws its shadow where it wants. And I've stopped checking whether the porter's curtains are drawn, because that's not my business. At Harbor Haven, the coats go out one by one, warrants traded for a signature and a softly spoken thanks. And the budget class laughs at my terrible jokes about envelopes. And sometimes Noah comes on Thursdays and fixes a thing without wearing a shirt that tells you who fixed it. We still don't talk easily, not every time, but when we do, it's closer to truth than to theater, and I've learned that counts. I miss May in waves, the way weather moves across a field, and I let it pass through instead of trying to nail it to a story that makes me look noble. I keep the care note copy in a sleeve behind the house tab, and on heavier evenings, I read the line about the imperfect deck board and feel forgiven for what I never finished. If you've ever found yourself turning revenge into a to-do list, I hope you'll give yourself a cleaner ledger. Do the paperwork, set the boundaries, tell the truth without embroidery, and then go plant something that will need water in June.
Some parts of life you document, others you simply tend. I'm tending now. It's quieter than the backyard applause and steadier than the sentences people say when they want to win. It feels in this room with the radiator ticking, like a door that closes without slamming and opens when it ought to. That's enough for me.